Hello guys, RGB Fox here, and excuse me if my voice sounds rancid. I am sick. Not as sick as I thought I was going to be, but definitely to the point where my voice is like kind of fucked, but we'll be good. Anyways, I'm here doing an extension of the video that I posted about a week ago of Nahida, and I'm going to talk about the types of teams that you can play with her, which ones are effective, and describe why and why not they can't be played, right? And obviously, based on what you're seeing on the screen, right off the bat, I want to talk about Burgeon teams, and I think Burgeon teams are actually definitely underrated, but definitely not like the greatest teams that you can play in Genshin, out of the sheer fact that burning is a thing that exists. Now, what does burning do for you? Ultimately, it like has a super sustained pyro aura. Not really. Basically, it's like you're burning wood, right? And what happens when you burn wood after you throw some hydro is you'll extinguish the flame, right? You'll vaporize. And so that's basically what happens whenever you play bloom teams with Burgeon in mind. Ultimately, what will happen is you will vaporize the attack. The aura, you know, assuming is not a bunch of hydro all at once, will remain with Dendro on the enemy, and after that, if you don't have any more hydro or the hydro application is just not fast enough, you will not generate a seed, and that's just how it works. There's a couple of ways to mitigate that issue, and that is realistically through one of two ways. Well, I guess one of three ways. Number one is just overwhelming the enemy with hydro, and if you do that with characters such as Xingqiu and Yelan on your team, then you'll be able to do so very well without having burning on the enemy for so long. However, do note that for the most part it can fall out of favor for you, as ultimately you're gonna have to keep normal attacking and of course switching into Nahida consistently to keep reapplying the Dendro, right? As you'll be proccing some vaporizes here and there with someone like Thoma, but of course because of Thoma's ICD, it will not be as rampant as it could be. So you're going to have Nahida on field in some of these instances to facilitate the Dendro application that is necessary in order to create the seeds. And of course, because you're overwhelming the enemy with hydro, more often than not they shouldn't, and you know, I say that with a grain of salt, shouldn't have burning on the enemy. But of course, once the hydro is used up by the Dendro, then you have a Dendro aura lingering, and that's the time when it can really start burning again. So yeah, do be careful of that. There's a couple of teams that you can play. You can of course do the one that is on screen with both Xingqiu, Yelan, Thoma, and Nahida. However, you could also do someone like Diluc. Of course, Diluc works wonderfully just because he is able to normal attack with Pyro Infusion with his usage of his elemental burst. Plus, he also has his elemental skills, which do have a short cooldown, so you're able to do a bunch of good on-field damage and then swipe the enemies with Pyro. But do note that you only kind of want him on field whenever you're able to blow up seeds, as when you build all elemental mastery on him, he won't do the most on field damage, right? So that's something to keep note of. Now, of course, you don't need them to be the triggers in the team. You can also use someone like Kazuha and Bennett, where Bennett will place the field on the screen in order to be able to have someone like Kazuha infuse his burst with Pyro. And because you're already building elemental mastery on Kazuha, he's able to have pretty good Burgeon damage, and it's really consistent because his elemental skill can also infuse itself with Pyro. However, there's one more way that you can play Burgeon team, and it's a way that I'm here and there, I'm iffy about it, but it can work and resolve the issues that you would have when you have an enemy who is burning, and that is to have an Electro character on the team, whether they be Raiden, whether they be, well, I wouldn't say Raiden. You want someone that has strong enough Electro application, so someone like Fischl, and even someone like Yaimiko can work out, and I guess even Kuki, because in these teams times you will take a bunch of damage since you keep blowing up seeds around yourself continuously. So you can use someone like Cookie to be a healer if you don't use Bennett. And now the reason why I say that is just the fact that whenever there is Pyro on the enemy with Dendro and they cause burning, if you use Hydro, right, you will vaporize. However, at the same time, if you have a separate instance of elemental application such as Electro, well, you could have it to where you will have Quicken on the enemy more often than not and not have to worry about the burning aura as much as you should. It still will prevent you from, you know, creating seeds in the short term, but then over time the Quicken aura still acts like Dendro, so having Quicken on the enemy ultimately means that you can still produce a lot of seeds. Post editing Fox here. Clearly I forgot which character I was doing the showcase for or team explanation for, and it was for Nahida. As you can see on screen, whenever she applies her Dendro application and you see all the blooms coming out and all the elemental reactions that take place, those in turn allow her to reapply the Dendro aura onto the enemy, which means that you'll be able to infinitely produce seeds. And it works very well because it's Electro. And I don't know where in my mind I decided to ignore the fact that the seeds of Skanda don't trigger during an elemental reaction, but they do. So ultimately this team comp actually performs super well and allows you to actually be able to ignore the fact that burning will be on the enemy, due to the fact that once official's Electro application causes overload, you'll eventually have just Dendro on the enemy, and Dendro on the enemy alone ends up allowing you to get the siege right off the bat. And with someone like Xingqiu who has fast Hydro application, trust me, this team actually works a lot better than I thought. So yeah, if you wanted to use you know, whether it be Fisher or whether it be Yai, it would be very successful, and I do recommend this version over the other. So ignore all the babble that I did. Just know that this is probably the best way to play Burgeon, but still you could play the other ones like I mentioned beforehand. Okay, one team that I think that hasn't been explored yet that I actually ended up accidentally stumbling upon is Burning. And in tandem, I would like to talk about Burning with Rosaria. Rosaria kind of got a decent buff. And that is with the Gilded Dream set. If anyone knows anything about Melt, is that you want Elemental Mastery, right? With Elemental Mastery, you're going to be able to do massive damage in your Melt comps. It does have a limit, right? You know, like 200 Elemental Mastery is really where you want to be, but having extra isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I have to explain verbatim that it's going to work in your favor more often than not, especially if you ended up being like me and spend for the Staff of Scarlet Sands. The Staff of Scarlet Sands is not only going to give her an attack buff based on her elemental mastery, but it also will give her additional buffs every time she uses her elemental skill, up to 3 stacks of an additional attack percentage based on the elemental mastery that she receives. So yeah, Melt comps with Rosaria and Burning Nahida can actually work surprisingly well, and this is my favorite one here with Rosaria, Kazuha, Bennett, and Nahida. And the reason why it works so well is just the simple fact that it works really well as a quick swap team, much like the OG reverse Melt teams did, except in this case Rosaria ends up doing more damage and your Kazuha ends up being a great pyro applicator as well as a grouper. Not only that, but if you're able to dual VV shred the enemy with cryo and pyro, you'll be able to maintain very good damage throughout your entire rotation. And in this team, you don't really gotta worry about not having enough Dendro in the enemy, because you'll be able to keep reapplying it consistently anytime you do an elemental reaction, or whenever you decide you want to switch into Nahida and reapply the Dendro to keep the burning aura up. So while it requires a lot more testing, I do think that this is a team that can actually work fairly well, and it's one that I recommend to a great chunk of my audience, as 4 stars like Bennett and Rosaria are very accessible. You obviously don't need someone like Kazuha. He is just a end-all be-all and very simple to play animal character, but you can also use someone like Sucrose, or I guess even Jean in this case, because she'll be able to do her Sunfire effect with Bennett, and as long as the enemies stay on the aura, you're going to be able to consistently proc the burning reaction and have Rosaria melt all of her damage. So if this is a team that you're looking for, I'm basically here saying burning is actually a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and it was a wonderful surprise to come against. But of course, if you don't want to play it, you don't have to, because burning is still not perfect. Now, suffice to say that Quicken teams are obviously going to be good with Nahida, but there is one thing that has been mentioned not only by Sajef but other theory crafters, and that is she applies a lot of Dendro. Obviously, if you watched my first part of my video, you will know that that is indeed the case, and in a lot of instances it's good. However, in instances where you want to play Quicken teams and you're trying to use someone like Kazuha or Sucrose to swirl the Electro Aura, you can actually end up swirling nothing, and the reason has to be because Nahida applies 1.5 units of Dendro over 2.5 seconds, right? And someone like Fischl, even if you have her C6, may not apply enough Electro to actually combat the Dendro aura, and thus all you get is the Quicken aura without Electro on top residing over it. And so when you try to use someone like Kazuha, Sucrose, or Venti to infuse their elemental burst with Electro, or even just swirl Electro in general, you'll find often than not that you will just be swirling nothing. And of course, there's one way to fix this, that is simply to just go ahead and apply Electro first on the enemy, and then you know, activate their elemental skill / burst and then suck them in, thus allowing you to target all of the enemies within Nahida's snapshot range, and then boom, there you go, you get the Quicken aura and a lot of good personal spread and aggravate damage. Now, my favorite team thus far has been this Kazuha Venti aggravate team, and it's just so good. In this team, you can actually play Kazuha on Thundering Fury, because you'll be activating a lot of reactions, right? You'll have swirl, you'll have aggravate, and in this team, I would say you can actually build him on personal damage and perhaps give him like an elemental mastery goblet. With his ascension passive plus his goblet, he should have about 300 elemental mastery before any substats are applied, and then after that, with Nahida's EM share and Elegy of the End with Venti, he'll have a surprisingly high amount of elemental mastery in order to be able to still have high damaging swirls, such as like what, about 600 at least, and that I would say is pretty good to have good numbers. And then if you have crit rate and damage on top of that, then his personal damage is also another factor that can actually help apply more damage to your team. And for that reason, this is my favorite of the Quicken teams, assuming there is ventiable content. But even if there isn't ventiable content, it still does very well in single target. Now, here in a second, I'm going to describe what happens, or not really describe, but showcase what happens whenever you don't have enough Electro on the enemy and thus try to swirl. So this right here was the best example I could find. As you can see, I start with Nahida's elemental skill and then end up sucking them with Venti, in which I go Fischl, and then boom. As you can see, any of the aggravate damage that you saw wasn't from Kazuha. It was all strictly from Fischl and her A4, and Kazuha is actually not swirling any Electro, and that's just because there wasn't enough Electro applied on the enemy before I decided to do all this, and this is going to continuously happen. And from this point forward, the only way that you can mitigate this issue is by you know, retracing your steps and going back and doing it differently. As you can see here, I actually go ahead and start with Fischl, and then I go Venti to suck the enemies up. Now Venti's burst will right here infuse with Electro, and then Kazuha at this point is going to be able to swirl it and deal the damage with it. So yeah, Kazuha, this is how you just fix your rotation in order to start it up, and it actually ends up helping you immensely on being able to get the actual damage that you want to get instead of just doing animal damage. Same thing here with the enemies. You bring in Oz, you go ahead swirl it, go ahead come in with Kazuha, boom, all of the enemies are applied with Electro, and then you can comfortably apply Dendro right behind it and then infuse Venti's burst with it as well as sucking them up. And because of Thundering Fury, Kazuha is able to spam his elemental skill a lot more often. But yeah, I had a boo-boo, so Venti died. Do note though that this isn't the only Quicken team that exists. Of course you have options with Nahida, Venti, Kazuha Official, but these are kind of interchangeable characters. For instance, you could have a Sinnoh team, and this Sinnoh team could have Double Geo, this Sinnoh team could have Beto, this Sinnoh team could have an Anemo user. It really is just up to you. As far as that goes, if you want a different on-field character that can give you a better quick swap role, you can also use Kaching, and same thing with Kaching. You can use an Anemo unit, you can use a shielder, what have you. Whatever makes you feel more comfortable is the units that you should have, and of course my Kaching is level 1, but yours might have been level 90 since you started the game, and if that's the case, by all means use this character. She's very good. And of course, you know, you could use someone like Lisa, you could use someone like Yaimiko, you can use Raiden. I wouldn't recommend it. I think Raiden is overall better with her personal damage rather than, you know, trying to add elemental mastery in her kit. But if you want to use Raiden, might as well just use Raiden Hyper Bloom. So yeah, hands down, I love Nahida. She's one of the best characters that have ever come out, and quite frankly, I personally would have been sad if I didn't get her. Now, as recording this video, her banner at, I think it left what, Friday, today's the 21st, which is now Monday. This video took forever to come out, but I've been sick, and so I'm sorry it took so long. But with school and, you know, work, it's just been tough pushing out the videos as much as I wanted to, but hey, I finally got this one out. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know what are your favorite Nahida teams that you have played thus far. Like I said, my favorite one has been the dual Anemo team with Venti Kazuha, just because it's so good. Quicken is an amazing reaction, and I don't know where I would be if I just wasn't able to play it. So yeah, if you like this video, go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe, and do note that I will try to push more videos sooner or later. This has been RGB Fox. Thank you. I'm signing out.